ready for takeoff.
All right, let's go ahead and kick things off. Folks straggling, that's totally fine. What's going on, folks? My name is Kevin Whinnery, and I'm the head of developer experience at a company called Retool. And today I want to talk about not the mullets that you might think of when you read the title initially, but actually a phenomenon that happens a lot in software development where you have kind of two different very separate types of applications that you're responsible for maintaining as a developer. And I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between kind of the customer-facing, the front of the house type of software applications that we build, and also these sort of back office applications that might be a little different. They might serve a smaller audience, but are kind of no less impactful. So we'll take a look at kind of the difference between those types of applications, and then I'd like to show you one approach to kind of building out the back office side of things using the platform Retool that I've recently joined to help build out. If you have any questions along the way, I'll try to save some time at the end. We can drill down into any areas that might be interesting to folks, as I think we do have a little bit of time in between the sessions. So I wanted to start off by saying, or sort of explaining a situation that I'm betting that many of you in the room have encountered at some point in your software development career. If you have as much gray hair as I do, chances are good that maybe dozens of times over the course of your career, you've been in a situation where you've worked on one application that is like the main application. It's the customer-facing application, the consumer-facing experience that you build out for the customers of your software company. It's sort of the glossy application that is what most people think of when they think of your company. In addition to that application, there's also the back office, the administrative interface, the dashboards, like the software that you build that runs behind the scenes and helps your business actually operate either your software in production or certain like key aspects of your business. And there's kind of a few properties that distinguish these two types of software. So for the main application, it's typically the thing that your users interact with on a daily basis. And in that application, UI polish and differentiated UX are actually pretty important. They differentiate your product from others in the marketplace. So having a user experience that is unique to that application is actually pretty important. They're also, those types of applications are also built for a broad audience with diverse needs. So you might have one type of user with a very different usage pattern, and then that same user has to be accommodated in the same platform by another type of user with very different needs. So you tend to be building for a very broad audience. You're also optimizing for many users that are executing small tasks. So if you're building Twitter, you are optimizing for lots of people sending tweets. And in general, you have to assume that most of the users of your application should have pretty restricted access to whatever data your application is using. And you can kind of compare this to what's happening with your back office software, which is it's typically something that's internal facing that maybe your partners or your fellow employees use. It's more important that this software is performant and utilitarian versus having a super differentiated UX. A lot of the times when you're building that back office software, you tend to reach for Material UI or Bootstrap or whatever the off-the-shelf CSS framework du jour is, because that side of the application just isn't that important. It's not as important as a contributor to the success of the app. You're tending to build for a small audience with a very specific set of needs. Sometimes that audience is as small as the 10 people on your support team that need to interact with a particular type of data in your infrastructure somewhere. You're also kind of optimizing for a relatively small number of users that have fairly complex needs. Sometimes they will have to be able to kick off hours-long data export jobs, which is not typically a thing that you'll see like in your consumer-facing application. They also generally have privileged data access. So you usually protect those applications with some kind of like corporate SSO. You are pretty interested in maybe auditing the steps that are happening or like the actions that people are taking in that back office software because it matters for regulatory concerns or what have you. So the sort of requirements for these two types of applications end up being pretty different. But at least a lot of companies I've worked at over the years, if you're in a situation where you have both the main app and the back office app, somebody usually loses in terms of prioritization, and it's almost always the back office applications or those internal tools. Largely because like the main app is probably what's like the revenue driver for your company. It's the thing that is customer facing. It's built for a larger audience, so work on like the main app actually impacts a lot more people than the back office software. And like to developers, like sometimes that is the more exciting piece of software to work on, like building a differentiated UX, shipping software that impacts customers outside the company. Sometimes can be a more attractive prospect than building that critical internal tool that everybody at the company uses every day. And then sort of on the flip side, the reasons why the back office side sometimes gets underinvested in is because rather than being tied to revenue, internal tools usually save time. It's about like making your team more efficient and creating operational excellence, which has massive impact on the bottom line, but it's harder to kind of directly trace that work back to something that helps your business. It's also, because the impact is smaller, it impacts a smaller number of people, it can sometimes be hard to like justify an investment in creating like really great internal tooling. And then one thing for me as a front-end developer, I actually know and am pretty sold on the utility of having internal tools. But it's kind of boring to like build the same React UI or like form-based UI over and over and over again. And that's actually part of why I'm at the company I'm at now is because I'm kind of tired of doing that. I've done it many dozens of times, and I think there should be a better way of handling that. And one of the big ones for that sort of disincentivize folks from working on internal tools is the maintenance burden of yet another application. Now, you might actually think like, oh, it's just a CRUD application. It's just a small web application that I can just throw together and deploy. Unfortunately, there's really no such thing as a small web application. Before I joined Retool, I spent 10 years at a company called Twilio. And one of the big like internal engineering philosophies that we had was no free puppies, which means you don't like bring a new piece of technology into the technology ecosystem, like spin up a Go application because you think Go is cool and you wanted to try to build something with it. You have to consider like what the maintenance and sort of long-term scalability and maintainability of that application is. And internal tools are just one more potential surface area where you create another Node.js application or Rails application where you the dependencies get out of date, and the next time somebody has to touch it, they spend days trying to update a dependency that has some kind of critical security vulnerability. So lots of reasons why you might want to go around building these internal tools. But because of that like sort of lack of investment, oftentimes there's these like kludgy workarounds that will emerge in the place of like software-driven internal tools. So there's the classic like one-off admin script. The picture here is the laptop that is actually a server that is running some kind of like long-running ETL task that is shockingly common, actually. You would be surprised at how many like very large companies are doing stuff like this, where like critical business workflows are happening on just a random laptop. And oftentimes, you as a developer, I'm sure like a decent chunk of folks in the room have been like tapped on the shoulder by a business person to say like, hey, can you run this query for me real quick and like dump this data out to a CSV or what have you. And it's really annoying because you have to do kind of a one-off administrative task to get that person the data that they need. So these are things that happen. We have potentially business users trying to solve their own problems. through sort of spreadsheet-driven, janky workflows that require human processes at every step of the way. Or they find some software as a service that does like a good chunk of what they want to do, but not quite everything. And they kind of have to make some compromises based on what happens to be available in a particular piece of SaaS. And in these cases, it's almost always true that some custom-built software would work better. It would actually enable teams to work a little more efficiently, a little bit closer to the actual flow of the work that they want to accomplish. And you can actually build software that solves some of these problems, and because it's software, improves the data integrity of the information that's going into and coming out of the system, and removes that capacity for human error that can be introduced otherwise. Generally, you should be thinking about, like, especially in these internal tool use cases, that software, custom-built software specifically, can work better to serve some of these needs than these like one-off admin scripts or manual workflows. So what I'm going to show real quick in the sort of back half of the talk here is kind of how you can go about building the back office side of an application using some of the tools available in the Retool platform. So Retool is a platform for developers that's sort of purpose-built for creating these internal tools that drive a lot of businesses. For example, we have one of our customers is Stripe, an API provider that's up on the screen here, and they have an internal application that their like customer support people use every day to like process chargebacks and refunds and those types of things. And there's lots of businesses who create these custom interfaces that are used heavily every single day. And those use cases are what Retool was built to support. So in your back office software, you typically are going to be accessing all of the same data sources, APIs, that your sort of main production application uses, but in a slightly different way. You might have privileged access to those interfaces or those resources versus some of your internal services. And you probably want to have that layer of corporate SSO and audit logging on top of some of those privileged operations. And all of that is sort of part of the platform that I'm just going to show you how to work with real quick. So in this particular example, we're going to show how you can build an application that talks to like your application layer's APIs, and also directly to some of the data sources that are used by the application. In this case, it's going to be a Postgres database. So let's stop talking and actually see how that works. So I'm going to head over here to the browser, and I'm on retool.com. So I'm going to show you how like sort of the hosted version of Retool works, but Retool also can be deployed inside like your VPC with a set of Docker containers if you need your internal tools to have access to sort of privileged data that's behind a firewall. This is one mode of interacting with Retool, but not the only one. And most internal applications start with access to various resources, the internal databases and APIs, like all the services that might exist in your business that drive like various parts of the stack. You'll tend to expose those as resources. So in this case, I'm going to actually be building an administrative interface for one of the most important enterprise applications that any of us has ever worked on, which is the Ruby on Rails guides. Built-in blog with posts and comments and those types of things. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate how you can do CRUD operations, kind of using the logic that you already built in the Rails application, and also a pretty common use case for internal tools too, which is some kind of human-in-the-loop workflow where there's like an approval chain that needs to happen. So the one light modification that I have made to this app is that when you make a comment on the blog for the first time, it actually can only be created in a private mode and has to be approved before it actually shows up on the page. So we'll kind of build out some tooling that will allow like our back office staff to both create content and also to like moderate these comments as they're coming in. And hopefully that'll give you a sense of just sort of how the technology works. So in the resources configuration, as I said, we have our Postgres database set up. This site is actually built and deployed on Render, which I found to be a nice replacement for like the free Heroku dyno. Pour one out for the free Heroku dyno. So if you want an environment to play around with for your Rails apps, definitely do recommend it. It was pretty easy to get set up. So this is the Postgres database associated with my Render account. And then I also have configured the blog API. And I have API in quotes here because I didn't really go through and do the entire API. I just removed CSRF protection from all the Rails routes so that I could just hit them with arbitrary HTTP requests. So it doesn't even return JSON. So, but I do want to use the API to like be able to post new to create new blog posts and stuff like that. So we have a couple of resources, and then on top of those resources, we're going to start creating applications. So Retool provides a visual IDE for building out these types of common applications that are mostly like forms, buttons, those types of things. So I'm going to come in here and create a new application, and we'll just call it blog admin. And I'll just double check. I know it's a little bit small, for which I apologize. So I'll try to blow it up just a little bit. But on the canvas here, there's a few things that are created for you by default, like this data table, which I'm actually just going to delete because I don't need that. One of the sort of core building blocks of a Retool application is a query, which is either a chunk of logic that's going to like hit an API and bring some kind of data back, or a literal SQL query, which you can write to like pull data out of the databases that you might be working with. So there is a query that's in here by default, and I'm going to start by, in my application, I know I'm going to want to do some CRUD on a couple of resources. So in the default like Rails blog application, the primary models are the articles and the comments. So I'm going to write some queries that'll actually help me get that data back so I can start using it in my application. So for starters, I'm going to select the data source that I need, which is the Postgres database associated with my Rails blog. And then I can write a SQL statement, so I can say a select star from articles, and then I'm going to order by updated at, because I'm going to want to get sort of in reverse chronological order all of the blog posts that are in my database. So if I can save that query, and if I hit this like preview button, it'll actually execute the query and kind of give me a sense of what the data is that's coming back. So hopefully that'll work, though. It's going a little longer than it often does. Conference Wi-Fi for you, I guess. But here, let me just refresh to make sure that I am still connected to the network. A network error when attempting to fetch resource, it says. So that does make some sense. Try to give it one more try here. I'm going to kill my Wi-Fi and bring it back. Probably a cautionary tale where you can actually do local development of Retool as well and not use like the cloud-based version of it. You can download the Docker containers that run like sort of the on-premise Retool. And so you can run Retool on localhost and do your development there as well. But let's bring that back and refresh and see if that helps us at all get back into a functional state for our blog admin here. Okay, so there we go. Let's grab the resource that we need. It looks like it's maybe also not getting my list of resources either, which is less than ideal. Yeah, it looks like perhaps I'm still having network problems here. So there are my resources, so that's good to see. Let's try to go one more time out here and edit the app. Okay, so there's the resource. It looks like it's coming back, which is great. And if I run the query, hopefully it will actually give me the results back in a reasonable time frame. This is a bummer, because it does have to connect to the Postgres that is running for the blog right now, which it looks like I am also struggling to see. So we're going to debug it live. I'm going to actually use my personal hotspot on my phone as an emergency backup. So this is going great, just for those of you keeping score at home. I can also try just using like the Hilton Wi-Fi too. Let's try that first. What's up? Oh, did it come up? Yeah, it might be the thing that needs to happen. Does often require that. All right, but here, there's my phone. Let's see if that helps at all. Yeah, looks like not about it. I can also try to quit Firefox. Occasionally that will help too if I'm changing networks. Okay, so that's positive. Okay. Blog admin. Sure. And there we go. Okay. So with internet, this works a lot better. And we can see some, just the blog post from the standard Rails blog application showing up here. So I have this data that I can start to work with. And hopefully my phone, I also notice, is conveniently at 10% battery. So this is going to put a lot of pressure on the 7 minutes remaining in the presentation, but hopefully it'll be just enough to keep us going. So I have the data source here, and I know that like in my blog, I'm going to want to show the blog post data as it comes back, because that is the sort of read of the CRUD application. So I'll start like kind of assembling an interface on the canvas using some of these like built-in components. So on the right here, there's sort of a palette of built-in controls that you can use to start assembling your application. And this text field can be configured with Markdown. So I can just set up an H2 tag that says list articles. And to actually display the contents of the blog post, I'm going to use a component called a list view. And if you've done any development with rich clients before, this is like the repeater element or like the iterative loop that you would do in a React application to render out HTML elements one after the other. So I'm going to start by like giving this component a number of rows, which is like how many rows that it should expect to render. And when I specify dynamic values, like anywhere in the configuration for a component in Retool, I use these double curly braces. So I can sort of template in dynamic values into the text content anywhere. So in this case, I'm going to use what's called query1.data. And the autocomplete shows me as I go along, like this is the contents of that query. And I can reference the first This object actually sort of represents a SQL query result set. So this JavaScript object contains keys for each of the fields that are brought back by the query. So one of those fields is the ID, and the length of that ID is going to be about six individual rows. And then within this repeating component, I can put in components that will be rendered for each item in my data set. So whoops, I just missed my drop target there. So as I start to drag this together, I can see these 6 items being rendered. But instead of this sort of static message, I want to show maybe the title of each individual blog post. So I'm going to say query1 dot data, and then I'm going to look for the title of each one. And then within this repeater component, I kind of have the access to this I variable, which will let me reference like the current thing in the array that I'm dealing with. So I can start to render out the title there. And I can also grab the contents of the blog post. So I'm going to grab, just copy that. And here, instead of rendering out the title, I'm going to render out the body of the blog post. So you can see the content starting to pop in there. So now we're starting to see like at least the read part of the CRUD application. The other bit that, since I want to try to show other bits of the platform here before I have to let you go. So what I'm going to do is create a form to start to actually create some new blog posts and start adding some content into the blog. So probably the quickest way I can do that is, I'll drag in some text inputs. So here's a text input that I can use, and we'll just kind of create a form to create a new blog post, like right next to this content. And I can specify a label, so we have like a title. And then we also have a status. So if you've gone through the Rails tutorial recently, you'll remember like each of the blog posts also has a status, which can be like public, private, or archived. So I'm going to create a dropdown for each of those options. We got public, private, and archived. And I can set the label to status, and also the default value to public. So in a couple seconds here, just like whipping together a few form elements that I can use to create a new blog post. And then for the content itself, like it might be nice actually to have a rich text editor. So with the blog posts, I can actually have HTML formatted text, so I can do bolded content, stuff like that. So I'm going to actually pop in a rich text element here. And I can use this to actually put in the body of the blog post. And then finally, I'm going to need a button to actually save this. So I'll pull it down. I'll just put it out here. It's a little non-standard, but that's OK. And this button, when clicked, will save my new blog post. All right. So yeah, just really quickly, I'm putting together an interface that'll let me start to create content for the blog. The bits to note here are we can actually directly add the blog post to the Postgres database using a SQL statement like we saw before. But that's not typically something you want to do. You don't want to sort of YOLO SQL statements to create data if you can avoid it, unless you're using a stored procedure which has some validation logic baked in or something like that. A lot of times what you'll want to do is go through the same API that you use for the models in your Rails app specifically, because you tend to have your validation and other logic that exists in code that you wouldn't have access to if you just did a SQL statement directly against the database. So what I'm going to do is create another query here, but in this case it's going to be actually a REST API request to create a new resource on the server. So instead of the Postgres API, I'm going to select this pre-configured API endpoint that I have in my resources tab, which I showed you earlier. And the benefit of kind of pre-configuring an API endpoint like that is you can set like the base URL here, and you can also configure authentication. So the default Rails demo uses HTTP basic auth to protect certain endpoints. So I actually already have my like HTTP basic auth header configured for this resource, so I can use that across all of the all of the requests that I'm making in the application. So in this case, I'm going to be making a post request to the articles endpoint, and then I can include all the any URL parameters that I would need, any headers that I would need. But I also will be passing in the form data, which formatted in the right way for creating a Rails model would be like article subscript title. And this is just kind of the Rails naming convention for these fields. And then I would want to pass in the data from each of those components that I added to the UI earlier. So I had a text input, a select, and then a rich text editor. So for the title, I can reference, I think it was text input one.value. And then I can also have my body, which is going to be that rich text editor one dot value. And then finally, I have the status, which is in that select that I added to the UI before as well. So when I do that, I can submit whatever is currently in that form, send it to my Rails API where like the validation logic that's configured in the active record models will be executed before the model is saved. And then on success, I can handle the success in some way. So like I can rerun the query to show the complete list of blog posts, which is what I'll do right now. And then on failure, I can also configure JavaScript code that's going to be executed if I get a 400 or 500 level error back from the API. So let's go ahead and save that. And then for this button, we can wire up an event handler here to, when the button is clicked, it's going to fire off this, this query that I just created. So if I enter a title, some new content, and some kind of text. This is exciting. We'll see if this works before I let you go to the next session here. Whoops. Just add it to be something. Some bold text or something like that. And if I hit save, I did get a 500 back, so that is a bummer. I was hoping I was going to be able to stick the landing a little bit here by saving the data. But let's see if it's something that I can quickly. Oh, which one? Yes. Atrical. Yeah, that's not a thing. Yep, there we go. So here we go. Let's save that. Now let's try it again. And it looks like it did go through there, and we have the new blog post content coming up there. So yeah, I'll take the pity. I'll take the pity clap. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Internet notwithstanding, today we learned an important lesson about making sure that your hotspot is ready as a backup. But the idea is that in just a few minutes, like we implemented at least 2 letters of the CRUD operations against my data store. But what you didn't see is that every retool application can be set up to work with like your company's SSO. So you can have Okta set up to authenticate users of your applications. There's sort of built-in audit logging, so you can see like which users executed which queries, and you can sort of secure queries to be only executable by certain people in your business. We also didn't get to see our workflow editor, which is like a way to create cron tasks in JavaScript. So instead of having the laptop open, you can actually run your background tasks in Retool as well. So definitely a lot of fun stuff to dig into. I'm also going to be hanging out a little bit after the session here and at a table in the exhibit hall. If you have any questions about Retool, make sure to stop by. And also, I have 3 Lego sets that I don't want to bring home. So if you just like sign up for a Retool account and build something quickly, you have a chance to take home one of those very fun Lego sets. So make sure you stick around and check that out. But thank you very much. I appreciate the patience, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.